Hello, morning. Thank you for joining us. I think one of you may have some sore heads. There are some people that are still wearing the same thing that I saw them out wearing last night, which I think is quite impressive. But thank you for joining us. Welcome to this CMC debate session. I'm Faraz Osman. I am the MD of Goldwalla and the chair of the BAFTA Children's and Young People Committee. In this session, we're going to wake you up with lots of fun chat around funding, taxes, and government policy. But don't worry, we're going to try and make it a lot of fun. We're going to be hearing some pitches from some incredible members of the industry, and we will debate with an esteemed panel and, hopefully, you beautiful people, before voting via an app on a direction we think might be a way that we can take this industry forward. Before I start, I'd like to say a big thank you to our sponsors of this session, Toon Boom. With over 25 years of incomparable experience, Toon Boom is an award-winning software, a global standard for animation and storyboarding. We are particularly grateful for Toon Boom's support for this session. So, our topic for this year's debate is what should come next and build on the success of the Young Audience Content Fund. Now, this happened at this session, and I'm not going to lie, I heard people start calling it the Yak Fund, which I don't call it because it sounds like a charity for hairy animals, but apparently everyone started calling it the Yak Fund, so we're going to go with that. To remind everyone of the context, though, if you're not aware of it, the Yak Fund launched in April 2019 and went on to deliver social value, the promotion of innovation, audience reach, plurality, diversity, as well as support for new voices and content from the nations and the regions. Programs supported by the Yak Fund helped to address market failure identified by Ofcom's Children's Content Review, getting all the main commercial PSBs involved and Indigenous language broadcasters across the UK, and even BBC decided to get involved as well. The team have not yet completed their final evaluation, but over the last 3 years, the Yak Fund has granted, get ready for some stats, over 60 production awards, 220 development awards, including one with us at Goldwalla. It has distributed over £40 million and generated over £100 million of production spend and over 225 hours of content. 30% of production projects were UK Indigenous languages. 37% of projects supported new talent as either writers, producers, or directors. 51% were based in England, 8% in Northern Ireland, 19% in Scotland, 5% in Wales, and 70% of the English productions were based outside of London. Within our production community, we're probably all agreed that the Yak Fund experiment was pretty good. However, in February, it says here, I'm going to read this out. In February, this government In February this year, the government, or what's left of it, announced the closure, and yet nothing has been said about what's coming next. So what lessons have we learnt from the fund, and how do we build on its success? As a sector, we urgently need to come together and speak with one voice on this issue. Today, we have gathered a panel to discuss some of the options and then consider the pros and cons of the different approaches. So please welcome our panelists, who should appear from here any moment now. Thank you all. So from left to right, I don't know if I've got my left and right. I'm still recovering from last night as well. Caroline Roberts-Cherry is the founder and MD of Saffron Cherry Productions, who make the wonderful World According to Grandpa for Milkshake. And I understand you do a Welsh language version of that as well.
Yeah, by Tadcu with our co-production partners, Boom Cymru for S4C.
And was that also Young Audience Content Fund?
It was indeed.
Amazing. Paul Nahar-Biswas is the MD of Consultancy Mediator and co-founder of EdTech video platform Boclips, which recently sold to US private equity for a lot of money, but he won't tell me how much. But you can ask him. We also have Alison Stewart, who's worked in children's media production for most of her career. She's now a consultant and a writer, and recently joined the board of the Children's Media Foundation. And Ollie Hyatt, who you may know as a founder of Blue Zoo, who makes some shows you may have heard of, like Number Blocks and Go Jetters and Superworm. Ollie also set up Animation UK, a lobby group promoting the needs of the animation industry, and is an all-round good guy, so thank you for joining us. Some eagle eye amongst you may have noticed that we are missing the juggernaut, that is John McVeigh. Unfortunately, he has become ill with a thing called COVID, and he sends his apologies. However, we do have a message outlining PAX Vision coming up later in this session, and we will also be debating that. But our other panelist, John Gisby, will be giving his pitch via video, and then, fingers crossed, will be joining us via Zoom. John's most recent role was MD of WildBrain Spark, the leading digital studio and AVOD network that reaches over 400 million kids around the world. So, to get our debate underway, we have two radically different visions of what should come next after the Yak Fund. I'm still not cool about calling it the Yak Fund. I want to be clear about that. But it's what's here. About the closure of the Yak Fund. We've heard those pitches. We'll then ask the panel to discuss them, consider the pros and cons, and get the perspective of a producer from Caroline, a policy expert from Paul, the perspective of the children's audience from Ali, and who's going to be wearing her Children's Media Foundation hat. But first up, let's hear from John Gisby, if this works.
Good morning. I'm gutted that I can't be with you this morning, but I'm actually in the Netherlands for my daughter's graduation from university. So my focus this morning is actually on being a proud dad. I'm going to try and join the conversation by Teams or Zoom shortly, but in case that doesn't work, I'm recording this in advance, so at least I've made some contribution to the debate. First thing to say is I'm speaking on my own behalf. Not on behalf of any employer. I used to be at WildBrain until earlier this year, not speaking on their behalf, nor on behalf of the British Screen Forum, which I chair. I am, however, leading a new initiative around the future of public service broadcasting. It's a podcast called Lens, which is now live, should be live on all major podcast platforms. And I'm interviewing people who built PSB over the last 20 or 30 years, so CEOs, Director Generals, Secretaries of State, really to understand what PSB is for, how it needs to adapt going forward in the future. One thing is becoming clear from all of those conversations right up front, which is that everybody agrees that children's content is really important, and the market won't provide the range and depth and breadth and quality of content that we would want our children to have. So that debate pretty much won, and very much, I suspect, partly the result of CMF's advocacy over the years. But my first provocation is there is no more public money to reinvent the fund that's just been closed. You all know the reasons why. You've all seen the headlines around the state of public finances, the amount of tax take that's highest in generations, inflation, cost of living, etc. There simply isn't any public money lying around to put back into this. Even if there was, if you think you're suffering as a children's producer, go and talk to an independent film producer. Their business model has been kneecapped over the last few years. On interviewing Ben Roberts from the BFI at a public event this time last week. He agreed kneecapped was a good word. They're about to publish a report which is going to be pretty scathing in terms of the viability of independent filmmaking in the UK. Why does independent filmmaking matter? $5 billion going into high-end TV and feature film production, and independent film is the on-ramp for talent into that sector. So even if there was public money available, which I don't think there is, I think there would be other people from the creative economy who would be further ahead in the queue than the children's sector, even though the children's sector is a great cause. Second reason I think the fund is dead is that the debate swings backwards and forwards between should public money go into institutions or should it go into a contestable fund, a new organisation with new commissioning skills, new setup, new overheads. My sense is, from the few conversations I've had, that the focus is very much swinging back towards institutions. So no more public money, contestable funding, not necessarily the right model to distribute it. My single biggest advice to this group and my first provocation is grieve for the loss of the fund and move on. Single biggest thing that you could all do today is to recognise the fund's not coming back and to move on. Second provocation is therefore, what can you do and where's the money? There was an American bank robber called Willie Sutton who asked why he robbed banks. He said, because that's where the money is. So my sense is to focus on where the money already exists in the system and do as much as you can to maximise that money that's coming into kids' content and to augment it with new sources of money that I also think are in the system. The existing system, obviously the broadcasters, major milestones coming up around the BBC Charter and the licenses of the other PSBs. Just make sure that you're engaged as much as possible in those legislative and regulatory debates about what the remits are and how much money goes into kids' content. That strikes me as being a really important lever to pull. The second is there is other money in the system. It's just not necessarily money that you've been used to tapping into. Over the course of the last 10 years, I've been at Channel 4. I've set up or run 3 major digital networks creating and distributing content focused on kids, families, teenagers, young adults. During the course of that time, I've spoken with museums, educational institutions, scientific foundations, sports governing bodies, sports clubs, all of whom need to engage kids and young families. They don't necessarily know how to do it. They know they're a media business and they need content. They know they need storytelling and great content. They need the skills that you guys have. They won't necessarily commission the projects that you've got in your back pocket that you really want money to invest in. But they have money, they need to engage those audiences, they will help support your businesses in the long run if you can figure out how you can configure content that's going to work for their needs. So my second real provocation is to go after the money that's already in the system, short and long term, and maximize it as much as possible. My third provocation is to adapt. Evolution is not so much about survival of the fittest, it's about survival of the most adaptable. I'm sometimes asked by producers, how can I make as much money in the new world of distributing and creating content as I used to make in the old linear broadcast world? I just think it's the wrong question because the rules have changed. I think the right question is how can you make content and new IP and new formats and new brands using the new models of building audiences, of creating content at much lower cost, potentially with a much bigger audience, but with much less revenue. So rather than saying, I've got expensive content and I need to find the revenue to fund it, actually, how can I make content at a fraction of the cost that I used to make it to match the revenue that's actually available? There are people who are starting to do that quite successfully. If you do, you create momentum around a project, which means you can then take that back to more traditional commissioners or streamers and get your project funded and actually bring content and an audience which reduces their risk. So those are my three provocations to get the conversation going. I think the fund is dead, and I think the sooner you grieve and move on from that, the better, because I don't think there's public money to go around. Focus on the money that is in the system and how to maximize it going forward. Third, adapt your business for the way the world now works by making content at significantly less cost with potentially a much bigger audience, which means you've then got projects you can take back to commissioners at significantly less risk. I hope that starts the conversation going. I will try and join as much as I can for the debate this morning. If that doesn't work for any reason, have a great morning this morning and thoroughly look forward to engaging this debate going forward because it's such an important one. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We do hope we'll have him via Zoom to engage with this debate as well. First, reactions. Give us maybe a couple of words reaction to that.
Good advice not to grieve. I think producers have every right to be angry and to channel that anger into something productive for the funding for the future.
Okay, Paul?
I think it's very realistic, but I think we've also got to consider where the long term's going. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't create an ecosystem that will work for the long term, which looks different to what John is talking about.
Alison, you got quick thoughts?
In terms of the YAC fund, the CMF actually lobbied to get enough money to extend it just for 2 or 3 years so that all these proposals for different funding mechanisms had time to be worked out properly. So John's made some interesting suggestions there. As they sit, I feel they're restrictive to producers in terms of the way they can go. But as I say, we all grieve the loss of the YAC fund. It's a shame that the government didn't see their way to giving it a couple more years of life on relatively small money just to get all these proposals and ideas really, really solid.
Okay. So just to summarise, but John's giving us the idea that there is no new public money. We have to get over it. But we need to start boxing clever a little bit about what money is available and how we can make the best use of that. However, Ollie has a very different vision about what the future might look like, which I ask him to present to us all now.
Got to try and operate a click. Oh, no, it's come up. Perfect. That's good. This lectern's too low for tall people. Okay, so I'm here today on behalf of Animation UK to contribute to this debate, hopefully a disruptive one that explores how a modern children's media landscape could operate and be funded. Now, different members of our organisation will have different priorities, and some of the views in this short presentation may be purely mine. So if we can all agree, if you like the ideas, they're Animation UK's. If you don't like them, blame me. So firstly, to directly answer the question on the title card, the Youth Audience Content Fund, I would agree, that fund's gone. But what we want to do is have a bigger, bolder, more progressive fund, and one that puts audience front and center. I think there's a lot of conversations about money, but I always think we should start from the audience. So one that puts the audience front and center, but also a fund that will benefit kids' content production sector and all the UK platforms. This content fund must fully meet the public service remit and values, but also encourage commercial activity, growth and jobs, a fund that complements the BBC and can be used by the BBC. A fund that recoups some of its investment to be reused for future projects, but also creates additionality in fiscal terms to the Treasury through jobs, IP exploration globally, and taxation. So why do we need a fund? This is a bit I'm going to go right through because I think we all agree that we need some support. So there's been a decimation of funding. People here have been talking about it since like 2014, but the reality is it's over the last 20 years. And just because content has never been more readily available, this does not replace the value of the UK voice, the UK industry, and the UK platforms that support such a strong public service environment. Over the past 3 years, the world has been flipped on its head for children, and public service content has never been more important. Now, I'm using the word content repeatedly on purpose because in many ways the term broadcasting is irrelevant. Not irrelevant as a platform, but because children don't understand broadcasting or broadcasters. To them, it's another button on their TV, console, tablet, or phone. However, they do understand content, and they engage with it in a variety of ways. Games, apps, social media, AVOD, SVOD, immersive, augmented, or if you're at grandma's house, a DVD. It makes a world in which we can deliver public service content to children more exciting and more engaging than ever before. Oh, and this is when my slides get weird. Sorry, 1 second. Ooh. Now, I don't need to tell you the value to children, the programs we make, but it's an argument we need to get better expressing to government and to the taxpayer, and we need a new approach. One that puts our audience, which is 25% of the total audience, at the heart of the debate. So when we talk about public service and the funding for it, all that matters is the content, the value of that content to an individual child, and its discoverability. That's not to say there's no place for a broadcast platform in public service, but the performance of that content should not be judged and viewed on the number of clicks on a single destination, platform, or linear viewing. Rather, a total audience reach and what it does for each and every child and how they engage with it. Attribution is really only a commodity for negotiation between the BBC and government and perhaps adult license fee payers, but not with our audience, who are agnostic and apathetic to makers of content like myself, let alone the people that fund it. I'll ask my child, like, where's this show made? If they're watching on YouTube, they'll say YouTube. If they watch it on the BBC, they'll say BBC. They'll never say Blue Zoo made it. They just simply don't care. And therefore, like, public service should not be a question of either this platform or that platform. In our view, the future should be whichever, wherever, however, whatever. The fund and the BBC should both reflect this. If the BBC could be freed from the shackles of being judged as a broadcaster and put in place as a public service content provider, we can stop fighting over getting eyeballs only on their platform and go out and find eyeballs wherever they are, on whatever platform, filling up all these different places as well as their own with amazing UK content that we know the BBC can and has made and commissioned. I mean, I like to think our own show, like Number Blocks, super popular now. No one but the BBC would have funded that, and that is the value of the BBC to me. The fact they can commission these things and we can grow them out of there. And they can share in the success of the indies via back-end participation while still being the main trusted gatekeepers of content in the UK. In my opinion, for this idea to work, the only real mechanism for funding the BBC, or at least children's at the BBC, is from broader taxation policy, or as I think some are calling it, the household levy. I'm going to put them all up at the end because there's like so much stuff on there, you'll just sit and read it. And I'm dyslexic and it'll be spelt really badly. So I'm just going to I'm going to waffle and then I'll put them all up at the end and you can like take little photos or, sorry. Am I not entertaining enough without pictures? Okay. Oh God, I'm so lost now. Sorry. My slides are going everywhere. That's okay, don't worry. Thank you. Oh my God, I've just completely lost it. Yeah, we might have to. Should we just go back to the karaoke? Okay, sorry. Okay, this next bit's important, you see, so I can't mess it up. Okay, so this is like a new bit. The additional part of this is that I believe there should be a direct remit to our sector to provide a complete and updatable set of resources for education up to the age of 16. Because teaching fundamentally changed under lockdown, and the use of our public service content rocketed and disruptively changed education delivery. The government have set up funds that are now exploring media and tech in education in a much more meaningful way. We already make content that changes educational outcomes for the next generation, but we could do so much more. And I'm not talking about traditional teacher-led lessons sitting in rows facing a board, but innovative learning with story, character, interactivity that sits around the curriculum. It will help everyone, especially the many children who learn in different ways, for whom traditional learning environments simply don't work. Perhaps this could superpower an initiative like the Oak National Academy that the Department of Education have invested in. There is nothing more powerful to the levelling up agenda than academic outcomes. To achieve this, the fund should include money from the Department of Education, as well as contributions from all nations across the UK, to ensure cultural content reflecting the lives of children of Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland can be seen and heard. So let's bring back the fund or create a new fund, loosen its apron strings a bit and expand it for much broader use. Let's condition it on some match funding. This could be match funding from the BBC and public service broadcasters, expanding their pot of money, or from other platforms. Those with official public service status should make a commitment on spend for kids, and this should be monitored by Ofcom in a more meaningful way, in line with the licence requirements. Funding could be given to any platform as long as the public service content was provided to UK kids free at the point of entry. Tie that money into similar conditions to an updated BBC Terms of Trade so that fiscal success is shared back to the fund to fund new content. The government will not only gain from the content enriching our children's lives, but will further support, with the further support offered from this fund, independents can argue for better equity deals internationally, have more commercial success, and bring in more tax revenue for the public purse. The fund should be accessible to UK producers and UK right holders. Investment could be further incentivised with a system like the patent box, maybe a kids IP box, or by tweaking the EIS or SEIS rules to better work for our companies. For inward investment, now unshackled from Europe, we should be looking for our Boris's Brexit bonus. I can't say anymore, he's not. Should look for any Brexit bonus. Extend the tax credits to 32% and to 37% for UK developed IP and productions in the nations and regions, making our incentives and production companies internationally competitive. The fund would deliver the vital resource of public service kids content, including education, alongside the great traditional programming we already have. And I think we should think way bigger. I'd propose a 100 million fund a year with a 10-year horizon. Why not use the sale of Channel 4 to fund all this stuff moving forwards for 10 years? Children could and should be seen as the most important audience of public service, and their content should be protected and ring-fenced by the government. With a crisis in education and at a time when innovation is needed, this is not about handouts for a failing sector, but a proposal that will revolutionise UK kids' content, support the levelling up agenda, disruptively change educational materials for future generations, and of course, support all UK platforms and all UK producers. But most importantly, my plan is a plan for our children. So I'm now going to flash up the slides I've been talking about. I'll leave each one up for a little bit while I either get grilled by this lot or we hear from John McVeigh. But I'm just going to flash them up quickly. This isn't going to work now, is it? So you're just going to see the slide. Green burn, yeah, I'm whacking it. Oh. Next one.
So while we're going to, firstly, round of applause. I mean, I think that was a remarkable piece. But Paul, I actually want to come straight to you because a lot of this, so I'm going to say this, we've got two competing visions here. One is, we're not going to get any more tax credits, sorry, not tax credits, we're not going to get any more contestable funding. We're not going to get any, the YAC fund isn't coming back. We need to accept what we have right now and work within those parameters. Or there's Ollie's vision, which I'm going to call the Yakety Yak Fund. Let's get the YAC fund and let's take it and turn it into a mega fund. Are these things viable? I mean, particularly with kind of looking at how we can bring all these pieces together and create something much bigger. Paul, do you see that as something that is possible?
I think it is. I don't think it's going to happen right immediately in the short term. But I think what's sort of missing, and sort of advised a number of different governments on different things in media, so taking them over to free-to-air digital or reinvigorating national broadcasters. And the first thing that we always have to do, which takes the most time, is get everybody around a single objective that they really think is super important. So in the UK, when the digital curriculum online was launched, sort of in the early to mid 2000s, it was because Tony Blair was behind that, very publicly behind that, because he saw that as being essential for the development of the UK and essential for the education of our kids and for us to be able to compete as a nation. And I think what's sort of missing, and maybe unfairly, is I'm not sure whether government, parents, institutions, teachers understand the importance of children's content beyond what they just sort of see on the screen or remember from a nostalgia perspective. In other countries and looking at it as a basis of education, it's the core building block, especially when we start to look at very early years. It's the core building block of what makes a citizen or our culture or learning environment. But I just don't think at the moment that battle has been won. And I think we have to win that battle before we can start to talk about, sort of what an ecosystem would look like or large amounts of money being put into that system. Because without them really buying into the objective in their soul and not thinking about this as saying, actually, this is industrial policy, this is about, supporting a group of people who are doing something, and it's about, a certain number of jobs and what people produce, but saying, actually, this is really important for us as a nation. Until that battle's been won, I think it's very hard to get that quantum.
Alison, does that chime with what you're thinking? Because you mentioned earlier about how we haven't been really given enough time to actually figure out, it would have been good to extend the YAC fund by a couple of years. Does that chime with your thinking that not enough is being done to kind of really champion the work that's being done by people in this room at this conference?
Well, I think I'm glad to hear Ollie talk about public service content as opposed to the work of the broadcasters. I mean, defining public services is such a difficult one, but the word citizens and allowing our kids to grow up to be those citizens is largely what public service is going to provide. But I think, going back to your point about how long it takes for these things to unfold, alongside where the money's coming from is where are the kids going to find the content? We know, and a lot of people have spoken at this conference, about the large percentage of kids who still don't have adequate broadband access. So if it's going on to streaming sites, we know CBBC is planning to move on to iPlayer. We have to make sure that the children can find this content. So I know this is a funding conversation, but there's no point talking about the funding until you've got the mechanisms to get that the programming out to the children. And so I guess a lot of what Ollie says makes sense. I know public service is at the heart of what you do, and probably largely at the heart of what most people in this room would adhere to. So while we're thinking about these plans, let's really think about how the BBC are going to get their iPlayer fit for purpose, how YouTube might be able to support what we define as public service content so that children can be helped to find that amidst everything else. So yes, of course, it's about funding, but it's about where that funding goes, not just for the programme making and the content making, but for the platforms to support it.
Caroline, you've been a beneficiary of the YAC Fund, and you've kind of made some incredible award-winning shows as a result of that. But I wonder how you feel about this, because I'm a producer as well. We've got lots of producers in this room, and it feels like we're having conversations about funding and government policy, etc. And I don't know about you, but I just want to get on with making some cool stuff. Like, is our jobs as production companies, even though we're the beneficiaries of these things, is it just getting too complicated and convoluted?
I think the situation today obviously is, and the events of this morning, I wonder if we would be having a different conversation if that had played out much earlier in the year. But as a producer, I think the benefits of the YAC Fund in proposing this bigger fund, I think all the good things that it's achieved, they really should be like analysed, celebrated, and from not just in an evaluation about money, because the funding conversations always come to that, but how do you evaluate social purpose? And that needs to be part of the conversation, that we do more than just make content. It's what we're giving to the audience. And, the World According to Grandpa, for those of you who haven't seen it, it was basically a grandpa and his 4 grandchildren on a sofa talking with a rabbit at a time, it was on air at a time when kids couldn't see their grandparents. And it was it was a reflection of something that was actually forbidden, essentially. And to maintain that kind of relationship was really important to us.
Do you think it would have got funded under John's vision of, it's...
No.
Okay.
No.
Under Ollie's vision of a super fund? I'm assuming it would be.
I think it would be under system Ollie. Yeah.
Can John join us? Is he on us via Zoom? Do we know if he's there? He is. Hi, John. Can you hear us? Can you see us? Can you wave to us?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I'm very much enjoying your background. It's like beautifully. I think you've got a DOP with you to kind of like make sure it's all put together nicely.
This is the best the Holiday Inn can provide.
So John, your piece was really fascinating because I think that it's a kind of a plea to us as the sector and as producers that we need to be quite smart in what we currently have rather than kind of start looking at something that's going to come further down the line. But as we've heard, it may mean that some stuff doesn't get funded. Is that just something we have to accept as part of this new future? Yeah,
I actually think we're all violently agreeing. But I think I'm sort of just coming at it from a slightly different angle. I'm just looking at this from the perspective of what is politically possible in the course of the next 2 to 3 years. Because I realise there are things on the slate that people want funding for, and no doubt there are more ideas that everybody could come up with that aren't on the slate yet. I think 2023 is going to be incredibly tough. Not only, presumably the current mess in government is going to get sorted out and we'll have a new government and so on. But essentially, whoever comes in as the new government has got 2 years to scramble to get an election together. During the course of that, and immediately after that election, we're then into a cycle of 2 or 3 years to get our heads around a BBC Charter where the current Secretary of State has actually put the licence fee on the line. We may or may not have a privatisation of Channel 4. We've got 2 new licences for ITV and Channel 5, or Channels 3 and 5 in Ofcom speak. So I just think there's such a lot of flux at the moment, combined with a time when physically there's just no money. I love Ollie's vision. I agree we should be aspiring to do that. I think that would be fantastic. I just don't know where the money's coming from, because to get that money put into the system, you either need to find it from existing budgets that are incredibly stretched right now, or essentially you need to take it away from somebody else. And that means a pretty significant disruption. £100 million a year for 10 years outside the existing setup of PSB system. That's a pretty major policy initiative, which means you've got to get government in line, you've got to get Ofcom in line, you've got to get the institutions either to buy into it or to be overruled. That's a pretty big deal. And I just, from a practical point of view, I just don't see that happening in the short term. But that's not to say that it shouldn't be advocated for the long term. I just think everybody needs to be realistic about how long that's going to take, which is why I also said in the piece, alongside that, there is additional money out there for the right projects. I realise they're not the projects necessarily that people want to get funded. There are institutions that are, if you squint at them, they are essentially public service media institutions. They're just not part of a regulated set of broadcasters, but they have very similar public remits, and they need to engage families and kids with and invest in content. And at the same time, as producers, there are things you can do to start get projects moving. So I actually think we're aligned. It's just I'm just sort of, from the conversations I'm having at the moment around some of the PSB stuff, I just think we need to be realistic about how quickly some of this can happen.
Are you being too optimistic, Ollie? I think your plan is exciting, it's bold, it's big, but is it realistic with this current, even with this current government, actually with the current landscape of our industry?
Yeah, I mean, what I would counter that with, I'm talking, the educational bit is like my extra bit, because we're doing part of it, but we can do so much more. And I'm saying we can get investment from some of the big streamers to do that. I'm saying essentially what I'm saying is work with them. So I gave an example earlier when we were backstage, which is, what if Netflix wanted to make a Saving Private Ryan style show that covered off history? If they're studying World War II, they want to make this big epic thing that all kids would want to watch because it's epic and emotional and drama. And they come to the fund and say, we will fund this much of it. It will cover this much curriculum. Can we have £5 million? We're going to be putting in so much more than that, but can we have that much money? They get that bit of extra money to top up their budget, and then I'm saying it has to be free at the point of entry. So now what are they going to do? Well, will they go to the BBC and say, well, you can have that show on iPlayer as part of your educational delivery. Do you want to do that? You can just have it because we funded it as part of this fund. Or will it go on YouTube so it's part of it free? So I'm saying you can access, it's a pretty similar thing. It's accessing different pots of money, but with it's the clear remit for children that bothers me. And then when you access that money, making sure they can watch it. So I do think there are pots of money out there. And I would add, when we went for the tax credit, we got told by many, many people it will never happen. We're in the middle of a recession. And then not only did it happen, it opened the floodgates, the games.
This is the animation tax credit.
Yeah. Then we got it right in the middle of a recession because they have to be seen to be making some policy that is going to be benefit. They can't just keep putting up taxes and not say, well, we're doing anything. So there's no stronger thing than saying we are doing this great thing for our children. This stuff they're using a lot of your stuff in schools, but we're going to make sure there's this unbelievable resource that runs alongside curriculum, disruptively changing children's education for kids who just don't engage with it in the right way, and all those kids that have gone missing from school during the COVID lockdown. Loads of kids haven't even returned. What if they could access this stuff and almost just learn by mistake? They're just watching this great stuff and they're learning. So I think it's wrong to think that there's a lot of money we're a rich country, and this is, I'm talking about 100 million, which is an accounting error for the educational system. And yes, they're fighting over pens and pencils, but they are all using our content. 91% of primary schools uses our block show, 91%. So they already know the value of it. So what we're just saying is give us a little bit more of your budget, and we can give you a complete set of resources. And I'm not just talking about video. I'm talking about let's do some more interesting stuff, interactive stuff, games that teachers can use, help them.
So, that puts us in an interesting segue. We have a statement from PAC, which I do want to read out. But while I do that, obviously we have a limited time. We've got some really big ideas on stage. But please do think about some questions. We'll try and get some questions from the audience. And if you're watching online, please do jump onto the Slido to ask your questions as well. But we did have a statement from PAC because, unfortunately, John McVeigh couldn't join us. And he says, as we are reminded by Ben McOwen-Wilson in the opening keynote, the YAC Fund came into being because Ofcom research had highlighted the decline in UK public content and commissioning spend. Across all broadcasts between 2006 and 2017, spending on children fell from 116 million to 70 million. In the wake of the YAC Fund's closure, PACT has committed to resources to dig deep into the numbers so we can understand the economic impact of the decline and figure out what we need to do to arrest it and then reverse it. We believe an important part of any solution is likely to be enhanced tax credits for children's and animation sectors. With producers able to cover 20% of their budgets with funds from UK government, tax credits already play a vital role in preventing the sector from falling off a cliff edge and will continue to be important. But we have to accept that there is no magic bullet solution. The fact that existing tax credits may only be helping us to manage the decline, and if we are going to address this problem, the sector needs additional support. In economic terms, the numbers generated by the YAC funds were small compared to the value generated by tax credits. As we consider the best solutions, producers need to be mindful of the fact that UK kids' content is still able to find markets and therefore income from around the world. There are opportunities and government support will help the sector to make the most of these opportunities. We need to reverse the decline in total spend, and doing so, we need to prove that the enhanced tax credit will have the desired effect of boosting investment. A coherent case for increasing the tax credit will ultimately need to be made to the Treasury. They need to be engaged in the process, but there needs to be a lot of number crunching to do before PACT can make that case, which is what we are currently working on. So this is interesting. So, we're currently chatting to the BBC, and tax credits are part of that conversation. I'm sure you've done the same. Like, as producers, tax credits are now making up a fundamental part of how we fund kids' programming in this country. And is that the thing that we should be focusing on right now? Alison, I can see you kind of like chomping and going. This is something that you want to kind of jump in on.
Yeah, tax credits are an obvious route to funding. And I understand what John's saying, that it takes a long time to set this up so that it can be properly lobbied for. My concern is for producers of live action factual fact-tent shows, which don't necessarily have the potential to sell internationally because they are English, British shows and don't dub, don't translate. So fine, if you've got an animated idea or a drama idea, we know there is good potential to sell overseas and to get funding, and the enhanced tax credit will go a long way. If you're making a UK-based live action show, where will you get the rest of the money? You're not going to get it from people who are looking for commercial success. So you get your tax credit, but who's going to commission the rest of the money? So I just fear that for those smaller shows, and particularly the live action ones, because we haven't had a chance to say it's absolutely critical that any funding mechanism can support the production of UK content that reflects the lives of the children in this country, so they can hear their voices, see their stories, and make sense of the world.
So, Caroline, you're making a show in Welsh language that does all the things. It's live action. I'm assuming that was eligible for tax credits as well as the YAC funding.
Yeah.
If you've got more tax credits, doesn't that solve this problem? Is it not therefore a bigger incentive to commission the next series, or do you think actually it needs support from deeper intervention from government?
It does need deeper intervention, because if it was just an enhanced tax credit, I know that The World According to Grandpa wouldn't have been made, because the money just would not have stacked up. And particularly for a first series, what you can get from distribution, pre-sales, it's the unknown. So I think it has to be a combination of a super enhanced fund and much better tax credits. And I'm not talking about going from 20% to 25%. It needs to be much more like the more radical suggestion of Ollie's in terms of numbers, and I would say 40%.
Okay. Paul, the thing about PAC's view and what's being said here is that it's probably the most achievable. It's something that the government are doing already.
Yeah.
They could do more of it. It feels like it's, and I don't want to bring my view too much into this, but kind of looking at how this has all transpired, it feels like the Department for Culture, Media and Sport didn't even realise that this fund existed, and they kind of were kind of blindsided by everyone kind of going, why are you getting rid of it? I think they just forgot to renew it. Whereas tax credits is something that they do understand, they do get it. It is something that PAC can actually impact change on. Should we be getting behind this because it would be the quickest result to saving where we are right now?
I think in the short term, you have to, because it's there and it's on offer and it's achievable and people understand it. But tax credits and every funding mechanism leads to a different outcome. And what worries me is I don't think, I've said that before, but I'm not sure everyone, especially in the sort of Treasury or the government, understand what the whole landscape will look like. And if they just go down the tax credit route, or if you got rid of, additional funding, or if the BBC was, pushed into a different way, what does that world look like? Because from we took a different form of tax credits when we did our digital startup, Knowledge Motion or Bo Clips, and the nature of the funding pushes certain things. It pushes certain types of platforms, or certain, in this world, certain productions, etc. So that rich tapestry of being able to get, sort of very specific content that, sort of reflects the uniqueness of the UK and life in the UK, some of that will be a casualty of, different types of funding. And if we think that that's really important, we have to look at that entire framework and say, well, what is our vision? Is our vision that we'll just go and get all of these things that can get exportable, but they might have a red postbox in it, or something? Or do we want a world where we really see a rich tapestry of different forms of content, short-form content, longer content, drama, animation, things being able to be reached on one platform versus the other? if that's the world we want to do, then we need a combination of different funding, whether that's commercial, whether that's private, whether that's public, etc.
John, I hope you can still hear us on Zoom. Like, tax credits feels like something that is quite close to what you're saying, is that, like, we should be taking what we have. Tax credits continue to exist. If we can enhance them, then brilliant. But we do need to play in the reality of what we're going to get. And is what PAC's saying chime with your vision, that, like, we just need to keep lobbying to get more of what we have rather than trying to reinvent the wheel?
I mean, tax credits strike me as being a kind of middle ground between stuff that the market will fund and stuff that the market won't fund. Strikes me as being a kind of a catalyst and a really helpful contribution right now when times are really tough to get projects funded. But I think I agree with all the speakers so far that it won't fund everything, because by definition, a lot of the stuff that we all nostalgically think back on, and which Ofcom says from an audience research point of view is the stuff that is not being funded as much as it was, is the stuff that doesn't necessarily have the commercial value to get international distribution and therefore make the budget stack up. So it would be pretty rare to find an industry that wouldn't be in favour of lobbying for a tax credit if we can get one. A very, very sensible thing to do. It's going to get more money into the system. But I think I agree with all the other speakers that it's not the only solution. It's clearly a short-term lever to pull on, but it's not the solution to the longer-term problem, which everybody's identified and everybody agrees on, which is the market overall, even with tax credits, is not going to provide the range and breadth and quality of kids' content that we all aspire to. And that's where I'm actually aligned, I think, again, with all the speakers, including Ollie and Paul, that we need some bigger thinking as to what that looks long-term. I just think that's a very big debate. And it means intervening in an engine of government and regulation and remits and public service broadcasters and funding and all sorts of things. And I just think that's going to take quite a long time.
So Ollie, this comes back to what your thinking is around, I'm going to try and make this happen, the Yak to Yak Fund. Like, if we're going to push for that, do we need to kind of say, look, there's just not, tax credits is just not enough, and we're going to need to everyone, Animation UK, PACT, everyone to kind of keep pushing for bigger and better?
I think they're trying to solve slightly different issues. Like, I mean, if you look at high-end film, VFX, all that stuff that is accessing the tax credits and doing fantastically well, all the studios are full, a lot of that is inward investment from America. And then you mentioned earlier about the problem with independent. We've got all these tax credits. Our film studios are full. UK, we're not making anything. We're a service industry to America. So how do we create our own IP? How do we own stuff, and how do we instill British value in it? So the tax credits will help people work with us in inward investment. Yes, they'll help us out a bit. I'm not going to argue against it. I'm arguing for it. But there does need to be other intervention. And one thing I really want to pick up on, and I'm going to blame it on you for how you read it and hope it's not what it meant. When you say that the contestable fund does not bring back as much value as a tax credit, that again is a money argument. The value for me is not the money. The value is, what has that kid got out of it? How's it going to enhance its life and grow up? I think we've got to stop attaching everything to money and start saying, how is that money used to give that end user a value and a position in our society that they can grow and flourish from?
So I want to open this up to the audience. Sorry, did you want to quickly jump in?
Yeah, picking up on that, I think when we are lobbying, and we have to lobby, it isn't just a case of lobbying from a financial point of view, but actually having the child front and centre and finding a way of coming up with a vision that goes, it's not just a case for DCMS, it's not just a case for Treasury, it cuts across health, it cuts across levelling up, as well as obviously DTI and the business angle. But if we have the children at the forefront of whatever the messaging is, we have to, as producers, be able to come up with a coherent and compelling vision for why this is so important. And particularly kind of post-COVID, there's been an approach to children which has just been catch up. That's all that matters, catching up. And as well as catching up on education, what about catching up on enjoyment, connection, creativity? And that's what we should be coalescing around.
Alison, you wanted to?
Yeah, just absolutely supporting that. And just to say, for those of you who don't know what the Children's Media Foundation is, as opposed to the Children's Media Conference, it is a charity, and it advocates for the best possible content for all children of all ages to be found on all platforms, and that's safe access. And it's absolutely key to what you're saying and what we're all saying. And as I said before, I think everybody in this room puts their audience, those children, front and centre when they're developing their work. At the moment, the short term does look depressing and gloomy. It takes longer, as we've said several times, to get a really, really solid policy in place that's going to help this. But in the meantime, anybody who makes content for kids, you need to be active. You need to follow the policies. You need to, don't sit there and think someone else is going to sort it out for you. It's for all of us to do, because we all agree that funding is not just about being able to make a programme. That funding must go to social benefit. It must help those children secure a future. And I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that.
Well, I think one thing we all do agree on is the audience is massively important, which is my lovely segue into making sure that we kind of involve you lot. So we have a few questions that have come in through Slido. Please do think of your questions, and we'll try and get to as many as we can in the limited time we have. One thing I will also like to say, we have a poll. If you jump onto the Slido, I think that it's at slido.com, and the hashtag is CMC2022. I think that's right. There'll be a poll there. You can see it on there, and we're asking you to kind of pick one of these visions for you to back. If you were to pick one of them and say, this is the voice that we should be speaking as it. Now, I know there's overlap there. All these debates are nuanced, but like, let's pick one that we want to kind of really get behind. Get on the app, kind of give us a vote, and let's see where we are. I'm going to quickly come to this question that we had from our online audience, and then we'll kind of come to some questions in the room. But to form the basis for a new fund, is there a role for a levy on the streamers, particularly for young people's content? Not a general levy, but it's more palatable to them as it's directed at the audience and market failure. Now, there's been chat already about free-to-air and streamers and the fact that like streaming has become so important to the consumption, particularly for young people. Do we need to be going to them and saying, actually, as government, if you want to be a streamer in this country, you need to pay a levy to have? Is that an idea that would work? Is that something that we should be encouraging?
Yeah, I think we should. I think if we do it, I think we have to really look at what the stakeholder, which is that streamer, is getting from it. So if we take that money from them, they become a stakeholder. And that objective that we have to do needs to achieve what we've wanted, which is said we want it to benefit young people. And it can't just be seen as being, industrial policy to protect this sector, that we're all part of. Okay.
So we've got some roving mics. Has anybody got some questions? I'm assuming that there's like a million hands that I can't see because of the lighting. So if our mic can find somebody with a hand in the air, let's get them a mic and let's get a question out there. I think there's one right coming in the middle, coming through here.
Hi there, yeah, it's John Rennie from Clothcat. Just asking a question, actually not financial, but geolocking. Ollie, your sort of suggestion relies really on geolocking for UK content. And as we know, the argument for traditional broadcasters, BBC, is that the YouTube algorithm doesn't benefit geolocking. How much is this still a problem for UK producers who rely on regional funding, minority language funding, where YouTube may be part of the problem here? Other streamers can geolock, but YouTube is refusing to allow it to do so. But we actually might need that in the future to access the funding and also provide public service.
Yeah, big. That's a big one. So,
that's an interesting question. Like, we are in a digital international world right now, and it comes down to the question around streaming taxes. Are we thinking too much about the UK? As producers, we want to get our stuff out internationally, but we also need to make sure we're representing a UK audience. Is geo-blocking the solution to that, or is it a barrier? Like, what are we thinking there?
It depends on the funding mechanism. So, obviously, if our stuff goes on one platform and then therefore is released globally, then the people who are funding it to go on that platform need to pay for all of it and more, because we can't then make another penny unless it turns into an Uber brand where we're doing merchandising and stuff like that, but that is so rare. So it depends on the funding mechanism. So if someone is willing to pay you over and above, so let's look at like maybe a Netflix original deal where you get paid, they take the content and they pay you the amount over the top, so your company is a functioning business and it can work. But what we can't do is get stuck in like, well, we're still only paying for the UK share, but it's now all globally available, because then we can't sell it. We're not in control of those rights. We can't sell it. We can't make up the other money. And then someone was on the stage yesterday or the day before saying, then we're in debt for 20 years while we try and work out what we do. So it needs to be worked out. It needs to be worked out like really, really, really carefully. And that's a conversation between like all broadcasters and independent producers.
So we've got another question coming, I think, from online, but also, obviously, if you're in the room and you'd rather not say it out loud, then please do jump on the Slido and you can get some questions there. But in the past, when public service broadcasting funding was under threat in the US, Mr. Rogers' testimony in the government saved it. If you've not seen the clip, it's an amazing clip. He kind of made a speech to Congress about why it was so important. So who is the British spokesperson best placed to publicly advocate for children's content? Who is our hero? Who is our saviour when it comes to children's content? Is it Ollie? Is it John? Like, is this part of the problem? Do we not have a coherent voice that like we're all speaking to as one voice?
Yeah, I think so. I think you know, it's such a complicated, difficult thing, and I don't think so parents or governments understand what's really happening in children. And if you want to win that thing, yes, you do need a single coherent voice. You have to have a single vision that's translated, a single sort of multifaceted vision, but it needs to be a single vision that everyone can get behind. And that debate needs to be had directly with whoever becomes our Prime Minister. It needs to be on their agenda. It needs to be fundamental for them. And yeah, we need to unify and have a single person who we can get behind who can have that debate.
I vote for the young boy who opened the conference.
Makes sense. I was going to suggest that we get Dougie to hand out like policy badges in select committees. That kind of works for me. I think we had a question down here. We're going to grab this question. We are kind of running short of time, but we'll get through as much as we can.
Hi, Sally Ankiza from Sixth Sense. First of all, thank you to the CMF for everything they've done. I specialise in live action. It's been a challenging time for 20 years, and we need people like Ollie on the live action side as well, because I'd like to ask you all, do you think children's live action will survive this period? Sixth Sense is 20 years old, and I can honestly say it's not a business. I just love children. I've pretty much made no money for 20 years, yet we've had the #1 and the #2 show in the UK. When we picked up our BAFTA, we were #1 and #2. I hope with all of my heart that I've changed the lives of millions of children around the UK. But if I'm honest, I would say to people, don't do it for a business. I'm super proud because I hope that I've changed children's lives. But I have so many people coming to me, sending me ideas, going, Sally, can you pitch these around the UK? I'm asked to lose the British accents from my content. We have so much up against us because we don't have that distribution side either. I just wanted to ask the panel, I hope with all my heart that children's live action survives. I love the work of animation and people like Ollie, but do you think we will survive? Do you think we do have those outlets in this difficult period that we're entering right now before a new plan is decided?
Caroline, we're short of time, but it feels like you're doing a lot of like live action work now. I don't know if you've got a hopeful tone for us about like our survival.
I think if you're a producer, you have got to have the hide of a rhinoceros and the optimism of Pollyanna. So yes, I am optimistic, but with some realism. And I think the thing about live action is that you can obviously be very specific. You can reflect much more in terms of cultural difference in locality. And this is a very specific example, but when we were having the conversation with Milkshake about what the evening meal was going to be referred to in the world according to Grandpa, we said, we're a northern production company, it's a northern writer. Of course, it's tea. And if something's homogenised and internationalised, you can't have that nuance.
And that's the challenge that I've got, because I'm permanently asked to remove that from my content. Yeah. But that's why the British children love what we do, because of the reflection of the DI as well.
Yes. That's really what I've been saying throughout. And it will survive because kids want to see each other. They're looking for themselves on TikTok. They're looking for themselves on YouTube. They want to see people like them doing what they do. Currently, we know it is a challenge. But, you were saying who's best placed to make this appeal to the government. The kids are. They know what they want. They're finding it. It's a struggle. And it's up to us really now to sort of say these are the things that have to be there and provided for them.
Absolutely. Children are the future. Well, thank you so much. We've got the results from the poll here, so it's quite overwhelming. But for John McGinsley's proposal, we had 16%. John McVeigh's proposal on focusing on enhanced tax credits got us around 9 or 10%. Ollie High. Now, I must say, Ollie said to me beforehand that his team may not make this session. According to these results, I don't know if that's true, because a whopping 75% said they'd be backing your vision. So,
thank God I bought so many people.
But I think what is absolutely true is that we need to make sure this conversation continues, and I do hope to see a lot of you out there continuing this chat and continuing this debate as we go along. So thank you. That is all the time we have today. The results of the poll will be on Twitter as well, and it continues to be voted on. And thank you again to our sponsor, Toon Boom. We are very appreciative of them. Next up is a commissioner conversation for 6 to 12-year-olds, which is at 11 a.m., and everyone can clear the room as quickly as possible so we can get that ready. You can also see UK creativity, talent-driven and world-beating in the Adelphi room at 11, and you also have time to grab a tea and coffee in the foyer. I'll be out there. Let's keep chatting about this. And that is sponsored by Screen Skills. Of course, don't forget any of the sessions you need to catch up are available on VOD, and you can view these sessions on the CMC 2020 app. Thank you to S4C for providing that, and thank you all.